What's up, my dudes? What you doing on your creeper van today, D? D has some water leaks. He's not very happy about it. We're gonna do some exciting stuff today to the old Beetle. So we went to the dunes. It was super fun. The car did great. Plenty of power with the new Subaru engine. Transaxle's awesome. But the one thing that we did run into is that we were definitely limited on the suspension. The stock suspension doesn't really have that much travel, and it definitely didn't have enough spring rate in the rear for sure now that we've added all this weight. So we're gonna upgrade that without breaking the bank. Show you the really sweet parts that I got. Oh, I'm super excited. So check out the spread that we have on the table here. These are 3x3 arms, which means they are 3 inches longer, 3 inches wider than the factory trailing arms. This will give us a wheelbase width of 6 inches over. Extending the trailing arms by 3 inches in the back will help shift some of our weight distribution forward because of our new engine and transaxle. In this box here, new axle shafts that are longer to compensate for that. I got some urethane bushings for the trailing arms because they're rubber in the stock ones and we're not gonna be able to swap those over. And the other thing that I want to do is when we go to modify the front, we're going to get rid of the needle bearings and the micarta bushings that are in the beam tubes because they get worn out and they knock around and just make a mess because they're just not that great. And we're going to switch them out with some urethane inserts for the control arms in the front as well. So the one thing that does happen when you, of course, extend the back by 3 inches, you have a lot more leverage on the rear torsion bars. So I used a set of torsion bars, 28mm torsion bars. It's going to give us a lot higher spring rate and help with the bottoming out issue that we got. One of the big issues that we're going to run into doing this is with the aftermarket control arms, we're not going to be able to use the stock shock location. So we're going to have to get kind of fancy with that. I'm thinking cutting the shock mount off the original control arms and then welding them to our extended control arms. So we'll figure that out when we get there. The more times I do this, the greasier I get taking these stupid joints off. Anyway, so the issue that we have with these axles, there's only one snap ring groove here. The original axle shafts from Volkswagen had a shoulder on it, and you saw in our bug build that we turned the shoulder back to accommodate the extra width for the bus joint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a snap ring groove somewhere down here to accommodate the width of the bus joint. Even though the bug joint will slop around, it's still being retained, so it's going to work just fine. And that will also give us the room to upgrade the outboard to bus joints later if we have to. So let's get to it. Dropped it. Yep. Now we're going to put the seatbelt on. See that? Alright, so Donnie had a good idea for the bump stop. So originally the bump stops are mounted on the arms themselves, but decided to get one of these low profile urethane bump stops and mount it up here on the arm. So I'm going to take the axle off so I can let the arm droop. I'm going to drill a hole through here and then grind a little landing for the bolt to sit. And while we're in there, we're going to section out the rest of this old sheet metal that was cut away from the original bug body to make room for our new shock mounts that we're going to set up in here. So let's get to it. After mocking up our control arms and axles, it's time to figure out how to mount our shocks. The factory shock mounts should save us some hassle, so I'm cutting them off to be repurposed. Then it's over to the lathe to make us some spacers to move our shocks inboard on the control arms. Alright, so I got everything tacked up in here. I cut the original shock mount off the old trailing arms and I was able to trim them up and make them fit. I have the brake line bracket tacked on where I want it to go. And here's my spacer that I just made on a lathe. So everything's tacked in the way that it should. We're at full droop. Everything still spins great. The CV axle's not at too extreme of an angle, but although I think we're right on the raggedy edge for that poor bug joint. So we'll see how that goes. But check it out. Sweet! So, the one thing that we have left to do is this extension puts too much leverage, obviously, on this arm because it's already hanging out from the frame horn. So what I'm going to do is make a bar that goes from the other side of the shock to our motor mount over here, because that's obviously another rigid point, so it'll kind of help tie everything together. So I got some DOM and I'm going to make some little pieces on the lathe so that the bolt head can kind of countersink into that, and then another piece that ties down there, and we'll get to cutting and notching and welding. And then after that's all tacked up, we'll pull everything off and full weld it, and then we should get some paint. Got the arms all welded up. They're over there cooling right now. A little bit hot to work with. Next thing we're gonna do is install the torsion bars. So we've been doing all the work back here without the torsion bars in because it's a little easier to get the suspension to move up and down. So that's gonna be fun because I have to figure out sort of the clocking of each torsion bar so that I get the same amount of preload on each side and get the car to sit at the correct level height-wise when it's sitting on the ground. I also got some new bushings for in here because these are kind of old and crusty and falling apart. So we got some fancy new energy suspension polyurethane bushings. So every single piece of rubber has at this point now been replaced with urethane bushings.
Snack. You can't be filming.
By using an angle finder, we can measure the angle of the spring plate at full droop and compare it to the angle of the spring plate when it's locked into the body. That way we can make sure that both sides are getting the same amount of preload. Then we can set the car on the ground to check the ride height and make adjustments as needed. Now that the rear is all sorted, it's time to rip that front beam off and get it ready to widen.
Now that I've taken the front beam off the car, it's so light with pretty little force. I can just pick the whole front end up. So laying on the ground here, I have my two beams. This one's the original one that's off the car. This is the one that I bought. And essentially the plan here is the beam that I bought already has the adjusters built in, which is the adjuster packs that everybody welds in so that you can adjust your suspension freely. I'm gonna go ahead and cut the tubes, whichever side I'm gonna keep, 3 inches extra on each side. Then join them together and take all the brackets and move all the brackets out an extra 3 inches. Probably tack it up on the car and make sure everything's in the correct position and measure it on the car, pull it down, and then full weld it and paint it. Let's get to it.
Utilizing a chop saw, we can accurately cut through both beam tubes and spring packs. By cutting the spring packs still in the tube, it makes them the perfect length for joining the beams. Since we're still using 4 adjusters, there's no risk of a control arm flying out on us because each spring pack is still retained by their original gland nut. Now it's time to make us some joining sleeves that will slip over the outside of the tube and hopefully make a much stronger connection than the trust I have in my welding skills alone.
I got all my sleeves made. You can see here, boom sleeve. I got some holes drilled in it for welding that up so we get a little bit extra weld penetration around the tube and not just where we're gonna weld at the face. Because we're lengthening the beam, we have to lengthen the steering arms too at the same amounts, 3 inches each. So I also made these other sleeves that are extension sleeves. It's gonna widen each of the steering shafts by 3 inches as well. Steering shaft's already cut in half, boom, boom. And as you can see here, I got a little fixture that it's sitting in. It's sitting in a piece of angle iron with some spaces to sit on the shaft of the steering arm in a V like this. To keep everything in line, I'm gonna go ahead and tack it all together. Before I full weld it, we're gonna make sure that test fit everything up onto the car, because tacks are a lot easier to cut off if you mess up.
After carefully measuring and positioning the beam, the car is a perfect fixture to hold everything steady so that we can tack our tubes and brackets in place.
Hey, bro, what is this, bro? Yeah, nah. Hopefully it won't be as sketchy to drive now. I don't know if it's like a rite of passage thing or something. You can say, I drove a car with manual drum brakes or something, but I don't ever want to do that again. Alright, so the car is about ready to go back on the ground for the last time, hopefully. Only thing that sucks is we can't drive it yet because the new disc spindles don't work with the wheels. Just this side will hit inside of the oval opening in the wheel. So I've got some extended wheel bolts and 1/2-inch spacers, which is going to make this even wider. But I'll show you guys what I've done, kind of wrap this thing up in the final state of it. The front beam, you can see the connection here, everything's all nice and painted. Here's my extended arms. Turned out awesome. I still need to adjust the toe in. I'll do that once I get it on the ground. New brake lines that are longer because I had to modify the brake bracket, kind of move everything out. New brake line here. So the back is so beautiful. Thanks to Donnie, he painted all of this and it looks amazing. Look at the arms and the shock mounts and everything, the way it all came out. It's so cool. I love it. Let's put her on the ground and see how it looks.
With our now much wider wheelbase, the fenders need to be trimmed in order to clear the travel of the rear tires. The only thing left to do is to take it off-road and test it.